Will Perdue joins us on the show today. Of course, you know Will is a former SEC Player of the Year at Vanderbilt. He does lots of media work in basketball, which is keeping him super busy lately, and will keep him super busy for the next couple months. Will, thanks for joining us today. Hope you're doing well.
Oh, Chris, I'm doing well, except for that, freezing my buns off up here in Chicago. You look out the window and it's beautiful, but I think it's like 6 degrees outside.
Yeah.
Very deceiving.
Yes, it's always cloudy and 30-something here, so it's pick your poison, right? I don't think we've seen the sun since October.
Well, it'll be spring soon enough, right?
That's the hope. But anyway, it feels like winter inside the basketball program. I don't know what you were doing when you got the text of the final score, if you were watching that game or whatever, but what was your reaction and what were your text messages like on Tuesday night?
Not good. And thank God I was working so that I did not actually – now, I did DVR the game because my plan was to watch it later. But as I was kind of following it on Twitter,
I hope you scrapped that plan.
I would say I was leading up to the fact that I've actually erased it without watching it. I figured there's no need. So I have not watched it, anxiously awaiting the Ole Miss game. But, needless to say, and I'm going to be honest here in the sense that regardless of what others say, I kind of thought that, listen, let's just go back to the previous. I pulled the schedule up so I could do this intentionally. You play a very competitive game against Missouri, right? Quite honestly, you had a chance to win that against a team that, again, is a lot better than Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt played really hard. They played smart. Even though they lost, I felt like it was one of their better games, quite honestly. All right? Tennessee, again, competitive, respectable. Arkansas, in my opinion, huge win. Huge win. But that's what I mean, though, when I'm talking about this, is just, let me move back to the South Carolina game before Missouri. I feel like that, as you went through these games, even though they weren't winning them, and you win Arkansas, and, Alabama, you lose by 12. Georgia, you win. We're now in this position where they're winning the games. Now, this is prior to the Alabama game. I feel like this team is settled in. You're winning the games you're supposed to win, and you're competitive in the other games. Now, you've had some letdowns. I felt like that the outcome should have been different against Kentucky. That's just my opinion. Surprised by the outcome against Texas A&M, but we'll get into that in a minute. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but then quite honestly, just stunned by the Alabama game and probably even more so by, things that were said after the game. That to me, I did one of those, what? Your head snaps back and you're like, what's going on? Type things.
One of the weirder things about this, Will, is just the casual nature of some of the things that are said. I mean, he's referred to the pre-conference portion as the preseason and using that to get ready. He used the phrase scheduled loss with regards to the Alabama game.
Listen,
the lack of urgency. I'm bewildered at where does this come from?
Yeah, well, let me interject here for a second. I get what he was saying, and you very rarely get that type of honesty from a coach. because the one thing that if you go back and you look at what's been going on this year, I know not at the moment, right? But I mean, Alabama and Purdue have kind of gone back and forth as far as the number one ranked team in the country. Would you agree that's a correct statement?
Yeah, and I know where you're going with this, but the correct answer to this, does this dress make me look fat, is always no, right?
You're walking a tight line there, my friend.
You know exactly what I mean. That the point is,
Right.
there are just some things that are just better left unsaid, if for no other reason than for public perception.
You're exactly right, because sometimes it's not about what the truth is, it's about what the perception is. Okay? And that's why I mentioned the word, probably more taken back by the things that have been said since that game, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Okay? But before I go there, I'm going to go there here in a second, but let me just, I've been very fortunate. I was at the Pittsburgh game, and just how they found a way to win that game and win by one was very impressive. The guys that were there from the 88 team and other alumni were there. We walked out of Memorial feeling very good about this team, headed in the right direction, right? Making progress. We talked about, we wanted to see things happen this year, see a significant step forward. And after that game, and I can honestly say, I hadn't seen a lot of basketball up to that point, but to watch that team play against Pitt, right? I'll get to something in a minute. And then I got to see North Carolina State in person because it was here. I didn't think they necessarily played that well, but they competed. They found a way to stay into the game. They found a way to put them in a position to still have an opportunity to win, even when I felt like they didn't play very well. All right, but what we've seen is the inconsistency of a huge win against Pitt, right? I thought that was really good because if I remember correctly, and I know that, this terminology, point spread and things, makes some people nervous, but, I think Pitt was favored in that game at Vanderbilt. But yet I felt like Pitt was a better team, at least on paper, and you saw what they did. But then they had the loss against Grambling State. I understand we're talking about finals, and I understand, what's coming and blah, 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 but that's just the amount of energy, both mentally and physically, that you exert. But to have that happen, that shouldn't happen. That just, at the end of the day, shouldn't happen. But I know people be like, all right, why are you digging up, old wounds? Why are you picking at the scab? Because my point is that now you kind of have the reverse effect in the sense that you're basically have backed yourself in a corner. And I feel like you have no choice now but to respond to this Ole Miss game. We use different terminologies like, and I'm going to make sure I use this correctly. This has gone from a game you can win to now you, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ole Miss is going to be without its best two players tomorrow. And let's be very clear. We're recording this podcast on Friday afternoon on February 3rd. Ole Miss is going to be without their best two players. So now it goes from a game you could win to a game you should win to, because of the Alabama situation, and you're now, looking at, 3 straight losses, a game you must win. So now we're talking about, and maybe you can help me with the proper terminology here, because it's more than just mental toughness, but now this comes to this isn't about talent, okay? This is about, and I understand Jerry said that this team was a step slow, but where was the competitiveness? Where was the the scrappiness that we've seen from this team, the level of competitiveness that we've seen to come to expect, regardless of the end result. That's what I didn't understand about how. Are you telling me that the difference between the Alabama program and the Vanderbilt program is that significant? That's probably what bothers me, more than anything. So I ask you, and we'll get into these comments about what was said in the post-game press conference in a minute. But this is where now I felt like, and I made the statement, you have to respond in this Ole Miss game. Not just compete, not just put yourself in a position to win, but you have to win this game. And this is, in my opinion, not to stem the tide of people calling for Jerry's job, not for, fans wondering what's going on, but just because this is more about the statement that you're making to other teams in the SEC, the statement that you're making to former players, not just former students and alumni, but about exactly what direction is this program going in, because this is Jerry's fourth year. These are his players. This is his roster. And then that's where you kind of get into the point where now we can start talking about the comments. And I know it's kind of been the long way of getting into this about, him talking about, and I want to make sure I get this exactly right, about him saying, we're going to play the guys who do the things right. I've been telling the same guys the same things for 2 or 3 years now. Obviously, that message isn't resonating. We're going to play the guys who do things the right way, and if that's sacrificing a few games, it's the long view of where we need to go and who we need to be. It's the message we are going to continue to send to our younger guys. Either way, we are going to get on board with it, or we're going to find some guys who will. I don't disagree with that statement, but what I find fascinating is the terminology now saying that, but saying that he's also been telling the same guys that for 2 or 3 years now. That's the part that now, I kind of raise the eyebrows on and be like, so is there a communication problem? Is there a leadership issue? Because that's what I'm talking about as far, it seems like this team's more of on an emotional roller coaster than they are anything else. And that's what I find interesting, from a situation about it. Seems like from what he says, they're having issues with veteran players.
Yeah, I don't know if this occurred to anybody else while they were watching the game, but the guy on the other sideline has been in the SEC exactly as many seasons as the one on Vanderbilt's sideline. And there's a little bit of a world of difference in those programs and how the players responded. No, look, that is taking an extreme comparison, the worst night ever.
No, but
and also with the coach who's right.
But you got to also say that Oates inherited a lot more talent than Stackhouse did. Let's be completely honest here, as far as what he inherited. But the one thing that he has done is move the team, the reputation, and the culture forward. And that's where I think that we could say that's what has not happened in regards to the big picture. It just, in my opinion, I'm not saying that we haven't made steps forward, but I'm just talking about when you look at Alabama and you look at Vanderbilt, I don't want to go the performance-enhancing drugs route, but I'll just say it looks like Alabama has the car that's on nitrous and Vanderbilt has the car that's just underpowered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, look, Will, you're hitting on the issue that from the moment he got here, everybody knew was going to be the issue. And that's my problem, is when you can spot something the first few weeks a guy has been on the job that is a problem, and in year 4, that issue is at the root of your problem, I don't have a lot of sympathy for you.
Right. And I listen, I know in this podcast, it's not a free-flowing discussion right now. I know my speech is somewhat abruptly all over the place, hesitant, and almost to the point where my thoughts are scatterbrained, because it's just, honestly, I'm having a hard time putting my hands around it, having a hard time understanding it. I had high expectations going into the season. I didn't expect this. I honestly say I don't understand the lineups. I don't understand the rotations. But I also have to say I haven't picked up the phone to call and ask, because I don't think he, quite honestly, owes me an explanation. And plus, he doesn't have any interest in giving one, because you guys have asked this question many times. And again, I always use the term, correct me if I'm wrong. Has he really explained it to this point about why he's doing what he's doing? I know the last game, it came across as a disciplinary issue to send a message, but I think that who's the writer for the Hustler? Do they still call it that?
They do. It's Bryce Smith, I believe.
Yeah. I thought he had a really good article in regards to, how he went about approaching this subject. And I know he made a very strong statement about the culture. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but like I said, I'm not around the program as much as I'd like to be. I don't live in Nashville. I can't get to the games. I try to watch when I can, but it's just, and I'll be the first to tell you, as everybody will take this full circle. When Jerry got hired, Malcolm Turner called me and asked me if I would come to the press conference. Malcolm Turner called me on numerous occasions and asked me what I thought about Jerry Stackhouse. I told him what I thought he did with Toronto's G League team. And I think it was the 905 was very impressive. I told Turner that I don't question whether he knows the game or not. The only thing, and I'll be very transparent, I said is that, coaching in college is just a different animal. Recruiting has so much more to do with it, but it's just the sensitivity of these guys, the lack of understanding of how good you really are compared to how good you think you are and what everybody around you is telling you, and the ability of a coach to be able to handle that, be able to get the best out of these players, consistently make improvement, and continue to keep everybody on the same page. And let me step out of the Stackhouse Vanderbilt conversation for a second and just tell you something about what I deal with on a regular basis. So I'm very fortunate with my gig at Westwood One and doing games with ESPN and all kinds of stuff. The best part about the gig is, being at the games, because, that game's on national radio. It's scheduled to not be a bad game. It's against two very good teams, right? But I've also had the opportunity to work in years past in the SEC network. And, one of the things that makes this job very difficult for coaches at the college level is, you're not only recruiting talent, Chris, but you're trying to find guys that are talented, that fit into the culture that you're trying to develop at that particular institution, whether it's Kansas, whether it's Vanderbilt, whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Illinois, because I think the one thing that's not talked about enough at the college level is chemistry. When I mean chemistry, I don't mean you don't have to like each other. You don't have to. Everybody doesn't have to get along and sing Kumbaya. But what you have to have is chemistry when you're on the floor. What you have to have is belief in one another. I may not like you as a person, but because of your work ethic and who you are and what you stand for when it comes to the game of basketball, I like playing with you. Now, off the floor, you and I, we're going to butt heads because of your beliefs or how you act or what you do with your free time. But as long as you come to practice ready to practice and prepared, and you're ready, and you come to games ready to play and prepared, both physically and mentally, I'm fine. But I'm talking about more the chemistry on the floor. Once you cross that line, once you break the huddle, are you on the same page? Do you have the same beliefs? Do you trust in your teammates? Do you feel like the head coach and his staff are putting you in the best position to win? And I was very fortunate to be on a lot of teams where that answer was yes. But I think that's something that, coaches don't talk about enough. Fans don't talk about enough. And that's kind of a crapshoot because you're trying to identify talent, but also a personality of an individual that's going to fit in with what you're trying to accomplish and the players that we already have. Okay, number one. Number two that makes things so difficult for college coaches is parents. And I'm not saying AAU basketball, but AAU coaches. Saying it's all because of AAU basketball is a cop-out, period. But some of these AAU coaches, but also the people that these players surround themselves with, that are all a bunch of yes men that tell these players how good they are, when they're really not that good. They're good, but they're not great. And then coaches constantly getting phone calls from the 12th man on the bench who's behind two All-Americans, complaining that their son's not playing and you're hurting their possibility of an NBA career. So it's just not about, the relationship with the coach and the player, but the relationship with the coach, the player, and the parents. And the AAU coach and all these people that are telling the player how great he is. And this coach is stunning your growth. It's just, it's not an easy job. And I think sometimes people don't realize how difficult the job it is, nor somebody coming from the NBA to college recognizing or believing or understanding how difficult the job is going to be.
And I agree with that.
Quite honest.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a pause there
and
for a minute.
I think, I'm sorry about, again, it's just, this is a difficult podcast because of what we're trying to accomplish here, and it's very difficult for me, because I don't want people to sound like I'm clamoring for Jerry's job. I'm not. But what I'm saying is just, we are now in the fourth year. The expectation of the fan base and the alumni and former players is different than where we are at the present moment. He got a extension. I was surprised by the timing of that. But listen, he addressed it earlier this week as far as security and the message he's getting from above. And, I feel like still Jerry's a very confident guy. I still feel like he understands X's and O's. But just the comments that he made after the Alabama game, there's I don't know. It's kind of like, what is it? Lost in translation. The message isn't getting through. Is it the way you're sending the message? Does it need to be via cell phone and you're sending smoke signals? I don't know. But also, it's just, you're at a point in the season where this should not be an issue. This is not something that you should be talking about at this point. This is something that you should already have an answer to. You should already have a rotation. And, listen, the final thing I'll say, and this long drawn out answer is that, if there is something where Jerry needs to make some improvement, it's dealing with the media. I know his emotions get the best of him sometimes and he gets frustrated. And I know for a fact this isn't where he wants the team to be or the direction that it's going. I mean, and for lack of a better term, he is struggling both mentally and emotionally with the losses. And I understand that. And I apologize for people that are listening. It seems like whenever we do these podcasts, I'm always doing laundry. Because you can always hear the washer and dryer in the background.
I think we have the same models because mine makes the same sound too.
But also for those that are listening, just remember, I'm in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo in the city of Chicago that's only about 1,100 square feet. So that's why, I can't necessarily go to another room so you can't hear that. It's kind of a loft style, so the noise travels amongst the 4 walls.
And also, don't ever wash a maroon shirt that's new with your white clothes. I learned about that as a freshman in college. Just going to throw that one in there to help the folks out.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because my son's a freshman at Miami of Ohio, and I noticed as I was tracking him on his spending habits that he started to buy a few clothes on his own. And then when I asked him about it, he mentioned something about a mishap with the washer.
Oh, boy.
At school. So I was like, so you realize you just can't jam everything into a washer, put the quarters in and slam the top shut. He goes, pretty much.
Yeah, that's a lesson I'm going to have to learn twice when all my white clothes turned out pink.
Right. But listen, to kind of put a bow on this for the moment, and we can get in more in the depth into the specific topics about what Jerry has said this week since the Alabama game. You come back and you have a impressive win against Ole Miss. A lot of this goes away, but it's kind of like the situation. I'm not forgiving him, and I'm not using the statement saying, I forgive. I'm just saying, like when you have a relationship with somebody, they'll be like, I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to forget. So you go when you win Ole Miss and you win handily and impressively, and you play as he was asked in this press conference, maybe yesterday, what is Vanderbilt's style? What is how they play? How hard they play defensively? You check all those boxes. You beat Ole Miss, this goes away. But the minute you lose another game unimpressively, it comes right back to the surface. So this is where to really put this to bed and put this behind you. You got to win You got to win some games consecutively to say, hey, we're moving in the right direction. We're improving. We're learning. You're seeing the players get better. But I'm sitting here looking at the schedule, and I'm like, oh, boy. Then after Ole Miss comes Tennessee, then Florida. And now we're back to, South Carolina, Auburn, LSU. Oop, there's Florida again. There's Kentucky. I'm as anxious as the next guy to see how this plays out, quite honestly, Chris. And so, but unfortunately, I'm sitting down on the couch with my beverage and my popcorn for different reasons than, hey, let's just see if they win or lose. And that's where we don't want to be as fans and as alumni.
Yeah, anytime you make a grab your popcorn reference, that means it's about to be interesting, right?
Yes.
Right. I don't know if that's how you meant it, but that's how I wanted to take it.
No, it is. I mean, we would love to be in a position to where we don't have to question the effort. We don't have to question the rotations and why he's doing that. And to wonder, when you make a statement that you've been telling the same guys for 2 or 3 years a certain message, why is it not getting through? We would love to be able to just sit down and watch a game and be able to judge it on whether they win or lost, not with their effort, not with, other aspects that are kind of outside the game of basketball itself. That's how I would love to be able to sit down and put my feet up with my popcorn and watch a game. Not with all these other questions about this late in the season. And I know when you say this late in the season, there's still got a big chunk of the SEC to go, but that's why you play all these games. That's why, as Jerry said, you play one of the more difficult schedules, in the country. It's why you play Memphis and Temple and St. Mary's and Fresno State and VCU and Pitt, and North Carolina State, so that when you get to the SEC play, you're ready. You know what you have. You understand your rotations. You know what player A, player B, player C, player D can and cannot do, how they help you win, and when you can and cannot play these guys. But it seems like that, even with the difficult schedule, we're not at that point yet. So why aren't we? What's being lost in translation? Why is the message not getting through? What can you please explain the inconsistencies? And when you ask those questions, we've seen it. That is the one thing I do get a chance to do, is watch the games off DVR, and then I get to see the post-game press conferences, because everything's out there in social media. Everything's on YouTube. And why am I still, sitting here 22 games into the season? Because they're 10 and 12. Am I right?
You are correct.
Why am I still sitting here scratching my head with some of these answers?
Well, I'm going to go to the mailbag here in a second. You said something a few minutes ago that because I always like things that I can quantify. And to back up a little bit, you and I had a little pre-podcast discussion where we were kind of trying to wrap our head around some things. I said, let's just go ahead and have this discussion on the podcast, because I think makes it more interesting when people hear us sort of struggle through our thoughts and try to outline them out loud. Wow, my dog is not liking this.
The dog's not happy about the discussion either.
No, nobody's happy about this apparently. But I've done this. I like things that I can quantify. And so I went back and I have looked at KenPom, which is the most popular analytics site out there for basketball, and I've taken their games that are in the top 100. Vanderbilt is 2 and 12. No, excuse me, 2 and 11 against the top 100. Hang on. Sorry, had to do a dog howling pause. Vanderbilt is 2 and 11 against the top 100, with an average score with the scoring margin of minus 129. The two games it has won, it beat Arkansas by 13 and it beat Pitt by 1. If you just want to play a game of I guess, and outside the top 100, they've lost one game. That's to Grambling. So if you just wanted to sort of even the score by taking away a bad win with a bad loss, then you cancel out Grambling and Arkansas, and what you're left with is 1 and 11, if that makes sense, with that being a 1-point win over Pitt.
Yeah, no. I totally get it. And that's why I say we walked away after that Pittsburgh game feeling like things were going in the right direction. But
yeah,
that's really kind of where that stops, which was unfortunate because, I was, even though you lost to North Carolina State and Grambling State, but, you beat Alabama A&M, you beat Southwest Louisiana. So now here you are, January 3rd, you start the SEC, and I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to it. And it's just kind of been, like I said, I'll repeat it and to make this podcast a little repetitive, but watched every minute of the Missouri game live. Loved what I saw. That kind of fed into, what I saw against Pittsburgh, the effort that I saw against North Carolina State. And that kind of continued. And then you got the win against Arkansas, close Alabama. Again, trending in the right direction. But it's one thing to lose a game, but one thing to lose by 57. But
yeah.
What you learn is that, again, perception and reality are two totally different things. And the minute you have this Alabama game, it just seems like things have come apart at the seams. Now all of a sudden you get a look behind the curtain and everything that he's talked about and, how he's described it and what he said. And you're just like, man, we've gone into some areas that I didn't think we'd go to in a post-game press conference. And then, later in the week, things that we've discussed about my job is secure and the message I'm getting from above. And so I'm just like, man, it's kind of like all over the place here. And what we would hope at this point, 22 games into the season, going into your 10th SEC game, that, there would be a solid direction and you would hope that everybody's on the same page. And, I just, again, it's just, baffling, whatever, but it's just, I'm just anxious to find out, what we see against Ole Miss. Because right now, with the number of games that I've watched, 2 in person, I can honestly say, and from how Jerry's been answering questions since the Alabama game, have no idea what I'm going to see tomorrow. None. And
Are you ready for?
Again.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
That's frustrating, but let me be clear before we go to the mailbag. And let me, again, I think I want to apologize for the abruptness, the lack of fluidity for this, because I think a lot of the podcasts we've done over the past, Chris, have been smooth. I think they've been very good. I think that, they flowed very well. They're easy to follow. I can honestly say I'm not necessarily too happy with, how this has gone about, but it's also been quite honestly, it's been a lot more difficult to do this particular podcast today than I thought. You reached out earlier in the week and asked if I could do this, and I said, absolutely. I went back and did all my research, read as many articles as possible, gone back and watched press conferences to try to get as much firsthand information as possible, not hearsay, not, so-and-so told me, but it's just been, because of the difficulty of this and what my feelings were after seeing them play in person against Pitt and also against North Carolina State to where we are now. It's just a hard pill to swallow, and it's really hard for me to explain myself, in the sense of, what my emotions are, what my feelings are, because I want to give Jerry the benefit of the doubt because I'm not there every day. I'm not in practice. I was fortunate enough to see practice prior to the Pitt game. And, it's just, I think the best way to put it is, and I've mentioned this, as I talk to forward players and we have text threads and, we go back and forth. We just didn't feel like in year 4 of the Jerry Stackhouse era, this is where we would be. We thought that, as you just pointed out, we would be much better situated, like, let's just say Alabama, not, competing with Perdue for who's the best team in the country earlier in the year, but, a program that is solidly in Joe Lunardi's week by week top 64 teams who's in the tournament discussion. And quite honestly, we're nowhere close.
Our mailbag is presented by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, please give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Okay, we got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to be selective here, but I like this one to start. Go Doors 94 asks if you could go back in time and give Stack advice when he took the Vanderbilt job, what would you tell him?
Well, I would tell him the same thing that I told Candace Lee when she slid over a seat and took the head job. And this is still the advice I would get, even though I know Chancellor Diermeyer and I've had the opportunity to get to know him a little bit. And he's looked at me square in the eye and told me about how important athletics is to this university as a whole. And until he proves me wrong, I still believe him. But the one thing that I would go back and tell Jerry, because and I'll be very transparent and frank with this. I don't have a relationship with Jerry. I mean, I talked to him for a little bit, him and his family on the day that he, was announced as the head coach. Since then, I've had very little interaction with him. Did get an opportunity to talk to him in Pittsburgh, but, to answer the question, I would go back and tell him that he has to be – Vanderbilt's just different. It just is. It's if you haven't gone to school there, if you haven't dealt with administration, if you haven't spent a lot of time on campus, it's just different. It's really hard for me to put it into words, and I don't want to drag out an answer in the sense of, to explain my answer. But at the end of the day, both Jerry, both Clark Lee, every coach there has to be willing to put their job in jeopardy to a certain extent by making certain statements, whatever it may be. If you don't feel like the administration is behind you 100%, if you don't feel like you are giving every opportunity to win, you have to be able to stand your ground and make that known. In my opinion, at Vanderbilt, more than any other university. And I told Kansas the same thing. If you're not given the opportunity, if you're not given the resources, if you're not put in a position to where you can succeed as the athletic director at Vanderbilt and truly help Clark Lee and Shea and Jerry, and you have to announce that. You have to put your job on the line to let people know it's not you. It's them. They're not putting you in a position to succeed, because nobody should be put in that position. If you're going to take a job with that much power and that much responsibility, you have to be given the resources in order to succeed. Now, a lot of those resources are at your responsibility. What I mean by that is recruiting. And I know a lot of coaches are very confident in their abilities, but also it's difficult and different recruiting at Vanderbilt than it is at any other school in the SEC, period. You can't refute that. And I know coaches are told that. I'm just not sure if they truly understand that until after they've taken the job.
Jor Fan asks, with an SEC record of 16-54, including failing to beat Tennessee, Kentucky, or Florida in going on 4 years, and losing the players they are losing, is there any legitimate reason to think next year will be better if Jerry Stackhouse returns?
Well, we kind of have to see how the rest of this season plays out, because, like I said, if he can somehow find a way to get everybody back on board, get everybody on the same page, everybody with the same vision and the same trust and belief, who knows what can happen. But you got to string together, some wins. And I'm not talking about win one, lose one, win two, lose one. I'm talking about, can we put together 3, 4, 5 wins against quality opponents? And when I say quality, I mean an SEC win is quality, because that's something this program has been lacking for a while, is, SEC wins. So, if that doesn't happen, then you have to ask yourself, what leads you to believe that next year is going to be any different? Unless, he hits a home run with the transfer portal, or should I say home runs, plural. So
Yeah.
It's kind of a wait and see.
Baseball Bros, and this might be the last one we have time to get into, depending on how long your answer is. As a former player, what is the mood amongst the alumni, former players, about Stack, and does Stack do anything in regards to keeping the alumni as part of the program?
Well, it's kind of it's a difficult question to answer, honestly. So let me take it step by step. I know that there's let's just put it this way. There's two different factions when it comes to alumni when it relates to Vanderbilt. There are those that are all in. They truly believe in Candace. They truly believe in the university. They want so badly for this to be the right coach, the right direction, the right purpose. So, they're just, what can I say? What can I do? How can I help? They're that group. And if you ask them that question, they'll tell you that everything's great. We're all good. We're certainly headed in the right direction. The future is bright, all that stuff. And then there's the other faction of former student athletes who are taking a wait and see stance. And I'll honestly tell you, that's me. I'm taking a wait and see stance. The one thing I will tell you, and I think that people that have listened to our podcast over the last year or however long we've been doing this now, understand that I'm fully on board with Clark Lee and fully on board with Vanderbilt football in the direction that they're going. I've been on board with Corbin for years because that what he's done speaks for itself. That's all we need to say. But one thing that I will say this, and I want to give Candace credit where credit is due, and Tommy McClellan credit where credit is due, and what they're doing. They're making headway on that new basketball facility right there in between McGugin and the Marriott. They're working on it. They're making progress. Things are happening. They got a timeline, the whole thing. So I'm very pleased with that. And for that, I want to say thank you to Tommy and Candace for pushing that through and for making that happen. And, Chancellor Deermeyer. But yet, unfortunately for them, it's a lot slower than a lot of us that are in the wait and see category would like to see. But we are making progress. Let's leave it at that. So I think you're kind of split. But let's, and from what I've seen on TV, the crowds at Memorial have gotten better, and there seems to be more student support. But if we don't win some games, does that continue? Or are you still behind the team when they're not winning? And that's, again, where we kind of have this unknown doubt. We'll see. So I guess you could say that the best way to say it is it's kind of a neutral feeling. We feel like that the car's in neutral, but it's something that can be fixed, but it might take a little money. So the question is it going to get it fixed sooner rather than later? There's a lot of us that unfortunately feel like that's the later feeling than the sooner feeling. So we're just, and it's kind of funny. And I know, okay, so we now know that this is going to be the last answer because of the time commitment, but you made an interesting statement. You like to be able to quantify things, correct?
Yes.
I also like to quantify things. I like hard evidence. I like numbers. I was always more successful in math than I was English. I like proof is in the pudding. I want results. I like things I can see, things I can wrap my hands around. So forensics, however you want to call it. And that's kind of what we're waiting for is the hard evidence. I have this inkling, and also the other thing, Chris, that makes it so difficult is when you get your emotions involved. I wish I could deal with this thing unemotionally, but I can't because of my history of, spending 5 years on that campus and the things that I did and what I went through. And, the times that I've put forth the hand and I've tried to help and I've, tried to bridge the gap. And again, I think on a whole, I think that this program on a whole, and I'm just saying on the whole, athletics as a whole is moving in the right direction. But yet there are certain aspects of the whole that are lacking, that are holding it back. And that's where I'm hoping that Candace and Chancellor Deermeyer are continually on the same page and, constantly pushing it forward. And then unfortunately, it seems like at the moment, and I'll kind of close at this, that, and I want your opinion on this. From what I see, from what I've experienced, the direction that programs are going in, the results, the stuff that I can quantify, it seems like that, men's basketball is the one that's kind of lagging behind. I mean, Shea was a great hire and I'll admit, I wouldn't say I was, I didn't want Shea, but I felt like there was other applicants that were probably better fitted. But Shea has done an outstanding job. I mean, what she's been able to accomplish in the short time period that she's been there is quite honestly, with what was there in the cupboard, is outstanding. I mean, she's a magician, of whatever else you want to call her. So that's when I say, I'm a big fan of Yellowstone. And those that know about that know that, they're moving the cattle from one field to the other, and that every once in a while there's a calf that gets away. And I just feel like that men's basketball is that calf, and we're trying to get it back into the herd and have everybody in every sport moving in the right direction. Is that a good analogy?
Yeah. How do I put this? Not that cows can reason. But if they could, I would say listening to sound advice and developing a sound process are key to getting where you want to go. And I'm just not sure that's ever going to be the case.
So now, that being said, I want to end on a good positive note. Okay. So, and I know this isn't a mailbag question, but this is why I think things are turning for the better. At least we'll go back to, one of my favorite things to discuss is football. And again, I'll throw it out there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but according to what I'm seeing on social and what's going on, Vanderbilt is making considerable headway in stemming the tide and flipping opinions on, local recruits, commitments, getting people, fans, local high school coaches to buy back in onto what Vanderbilt can do for your players and the reasons why your guys should come to Vanderbilt and not go to other schools outside of Nashville.
And with that, I guess we're done today because you're up against a deadline, I guess, so to speak, of where you need to get to go. So with that, we'll close unless you've got parting thoughts we didn't get to.
No, sir, I'm done. And again, I want to apologize for, it's like we've been driving this car for the last 55 minutes over a road full of potholes. And we haven't done a very good job of missing the potholes. So it's been a rough podcast, but that's just, it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be smooth, but that's just what makes talking about Vanderbilt basketball, talking about progress, trying to remove your emotions from the equation and quantify your answers, feel like you have evidence and not just be throwing out a bunch, of wild opinions. It's going to be difficult at times, and it's not going to be what you want or what you expect, but yet, you feel like that you accomplished something.
Hey, I know a guy who's been stuck about 7 years on the podcast roundabout, just pointing the kids towards Big Ben, if you want to use that analogy. So anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to admit that you got a chuckle out of me. That's pretty good. Hey, kids, Big Ben.
Hey, kids, Big Ben. One of these days we're going to get off the roundabout. Our best hope for that is baseball.
That's a good
starts
way to
in
end
2
it right
weeks.
there, Chris.
I couldn't help but think when you brought roads into it, I'm like, yeah, been there. All right, hey, Will. In all seriousness, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll catch you again in a couple of weeks. I know your schedule is challenging because this is the time where you're traveling a lot for basketball, not just with the Bulls, but you do some college stuff. You'll be doing a lot of March Madness, but I think we will have something interesting to talk about one way or the other, however this resolves.
We always do.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
All right. We'll talk to you later, Chris. Thank you.